In the dusty armory of Forward Operating Base Sentinel, where the desert wind carried whispers of danger and the metallic scent of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, Commander Jake Mitchell thought he'd seen everything a war zone could offer. 23 years in the Navy SEALs had shown him the best and worst of human capability. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he was about to discover about the quiet woman methodically cleaning a Barrett .50 caliber rifle with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. What started as a routine inspection would shatter every assumption he'd ever made about the limits of human marksmanship. The number 3347 would haunt his dreams and rewrite the history books, because sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the most ordinary moments. And sometimes, legends are born not with fanfare, but with the soft click of a rifle bolt sliding into place. The woman didn't look up when his boots echoed against the concrete floor. She didn't need to. She already knew he was coming. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Sentinel as Commander Jake Mitchell made his rounds through the facility. The base sat like a fortress in the Afghan mountains, surrounded by walls of concrete and razor wire that gleamed silver in the early light. Inside these walls, hundreds of military personnel went about their daily routines, maintaining equipment, planning missions, and preparing for the unknown dangers that lurked beyond the perimeter. Jake had been commanding SEAL Team 7 for 3 years now, and in that time, he'd learned to read the rhythm of military life like a musician reads sheet music. Every sound had meaning, every movement had purpose, and every deviation from routine demanded his attention. That's why the soft, methodical sounds coming from the armory caught his ear as he walked past on his morning inspection. The armory was supposed to be empty at this hour. Most soldiers cleaned their weapons in their quarters or in the designated cleaning areas near the barracks. The main armory was reserved for major maintenance and repairs, usually conducted by the base's weapon specialists. Jake paused outside the heavy steel door, listening to the rhythmic sounds of disassembly and cleaning that echoed from within. He pushed open the door and stepped into the dimly lit space. Rows of weapons lined the walls in secure racks, from standard M4 carbines to specialized sniper rifles and heavy machine guns. The smell of gun oil and metal cleaner filled the air, mixed with the faint scent of cordite that seemed to permanently permeate every armory Jake had ever visited. At a workbench in the far corner, a figure sat hunched over a massive rifle. Even from across the room, Jake recognized the distinctive profile of a Barrett M82A1, the legendary .50 caliber sniper rifle that could punch through armor plating and reach targets over a mile away. The weapon was completely disassembled, its components laid out with surgical precision across a clean white cloth. The person working on the Barrett was smaller than Jake had expected, wearing standard desert camouflage fatigues with sleeves rolled up to reveal surprisingly delicate forearms. Dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and Jake could see the focused concentration in the way the figure moved, each gesture deliberate and practiced. As Jake approached, he realized the soldier was a woman, probably in her late 20s, with an olive complexion and sharp, intelligent features. She worked with the kind of fluid efficiency that spoke of thousands of hours of practice, her hands moving over the weapon's components like a pianist's fingers dancing across keys. "Sergeant," Jake said, announcing his presence. The woman looked up briefly, her dark eyes meeting his for just a moment before returning to her work. "Sir," she replied simply, not stopping her methodical cleaning process. Jake noticed she didn't seem surprised or nervous about being discovered in the armory. If anything, she appeared completely comfortable, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Jake moved closer to get a better look at her work. The Barrett was notorious for being a difficult weapon to maintain, with dozens of precision components that required expert knowledge to properly disassemble and reassemble. Most soldiers needed extensive training and reference manuals to work on one. This woman was doing it from memory, and doing it perfectly. "I don't think we've been introduced," Jake said, reading the name tape on her uniform. "Sergeant Rodriguez. What unit are you with?" "Army Intelligence, sir. 525th Military Intelligence Brigade." Her voice was calm and professional, with just a hint of a Texas accent. "I'm attached to your base for special operations support." Jake nodded. It wasn't uncommon for various specialized personnel to be temporarily assigned to SEAL bases for specific missions. Intelligence analysts, communication specialists, and other support staff often rotated through to provide expertise for particular operations. "And you're in here because?" Jake asked, gesturing at the disassembled rifle. "Maintenance request, sir. This Barrett's been having feeding issues. Thought I'd take a look." She held up a component that Jake recognized as part of the bolt assembly. "Found the problem. Extractor spring starting to fatigue. Should be replaced before the next mission." Jake was impressed despite himself. The Barrett's feeding mechanism was notoriously finicky, and diagnosing spring fatigue required the kind of experience that usually came from years of working with precision rifles. He watched as she expertly reassembled the bolt group, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the complex mechanism. "Where'd you learn to work on .50 cals?" Jake asked.
"Here and there, sir." There was something in her tone that suggested there was more to the story, but she clearly wasn't inclined to elaborate. "My daddy was a gunsmith back in Texas."
"Started working on rifles when I was about 8 years old." As she spoke, she continued reassembling the Barrett with smooth, efficient movements. Jake found himself fascinated by the precision of her work. Each component slid into place with barely a whisper of metal on metal, and she never once referred to a manual or diagram. This was muscle memory built over countless hours of practice. "What's your primary MOS?" Jake asked, referring to her military occupational specialty. 35 November, sir. Human intelligence collector. But I cross-trained on several specialties. She installed the barrel assembly with a practiced twist of her wrist. Figured it might come in handy downrange. Jake had worked with intelligence personnel before, and most of them were more comfortable behind computer screens than weapon workbenches. Rodriguez was clearly different. There was a competence about her that went beyond book learning, a confidence that came from real experience. "You ever actually fire one of these?" Jake asked, nodding at the Barrett as she completed the reassembly. For the first time since he'd entered the armory, Rodriguez paused in her work. She looked up at him with those dark, intelligent eyes, and Jake saw something flicker across her expression. It was gone so quickly he might have imagined it, but for just a moment, he thought he saw something that looked like amusement. "Once or twice, sir," she said quietly. Something in her tone made Jake's instincts prickle. In his years of military service, he'd learned to recognize when someone was being deliberately modest. There was a weight to her words that suggested significant understatement. "Once or twice," Jake repeated, studying her face. Rodriguez had returned to her work, checking the rifle's action with smooth, practiced movements. "What's your best shot with one of these?" Again, that pause. This time, Rodriguez set down the rifle and looked directly at him. Her expression was unreadable, but Jake sensed he was approaching something significant. "That's complicated, sir." "Complicated how?" Rodriguez glanced around the armory as if checking to make sure they were alone. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more careful. "Some of my work is classified, sir. Different rules apply when you're operating in certain capacities." Jake felt his pulse quicken. He'd been in special operations long enough to recognize the careful language of black operations and classified missions. The woman sitting in front of him wasn't just an intelligence analyst who happened to know her way around a rifle. She was something else entirely. "What's your security clearance, Sergeant?" "TSSIC, sir, with special access programs. Top secret sensitive compartment information with special access programs." That was the kind of clearance reserved for the most sensitive operations, the kind of missions that officially never happened. Jake felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to click into place. "How long have you been attached to this base?" 3 days, sir. Just arrived for mission prep." "What mission?" Rodriguez hesitated for a moment, then reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out a folded document. She handed it to Jake without a word. Jake unfolded the paper and immediately recognized the format of a special operations briefing sheet. Most of the document was heavily redacted, with thick black bars covering critical information. What he could read made his eyebrows rise. The mission designation was classified, but he could see references to extreme long-range reconnaissance and precision elimination of high-value targets. There were geographic coordinates that placed the operation somewhere in the mountains along the Afghan-Pakistani border, some of the most dangerous and inaccessible terrain in the theater. Most interesting was a small note in the corner of the document, written in the clinical language of military bureaucracy. "Sniper support authorized for extreme range engagements beyond 2,000 meters." Jake looked up from the document to find Rodriguez watching him carefully.
"You're not just here for intelligence collection, are you?" "No, sir."
"Not exactly." You're the sniper." "Yes, sir." Jake felt a moment of confusion. Special operations snipers were among the most elite soldiers in the military, typically coming from specialized units with years of advanced training. They certainly didn't usually come from intelligence backgrounds, and they definitely weren't usually women. Not because women couldn't do the job, but because the physical and psychological demands of long-range sniping had traditionally attracted male recruits. "Where did you do your sniper training?" "Multiple locations, sir. Some with Army Special Operations, some with other agencies." The careful way she phrased it suggested civilian intelligence agencies, the kind of organizations that didn't officially exist in most government documents. Jake handed back the briefing document, his mind racing. Everything about this situation was unusual. A female intelligence analyst who doubled as a sniper, assigned to a mission requiring extreme range engagements, working alone without a spotter or support team. It didn't fit any standard operational profile he knew. "What's your longest confirmed kill?" he asked. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling on the Barrett stock. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet Jake had to strain to hear it. "That's classified, sir."
But there was something in her expression. A flicker of...
What? Pride? Regret? Jake couldn't tell, but he could sense that behind that classified designation lay something extraordinary. "Give me a ballpark. Are we talking about standard sniper ranges? 500 meters? 1,000? Rodriguez looked at him for a long moment, clearly weighing how much she could or should reveal. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Significantly more than that, sir." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The longest confirmed sniper kill in military history was just over 3,500 meters, achieved by a Canadian Special Forces sniper using specialized equipment under perfect conditions. The shot had been considered almost miraculous, a combination of exceptional skill, perfect conditions, and extraordinary luck. "How much more than standard range?" Jake pressed. Rodriguez stood up from the workbench, slinging the Barrett over her shoulder with practiced ease. The massive rifle, which weighed nearly 30 pounds, seemed almost weightless in her hands. "Sir, with respect, some questions are better left unanswered, at least until after the mission." She headed toward the armory door, pausing just before she reached it. Without turning around, she spoke one more time. "But I will say this, Commander. The Barrett's a fine rifle, but for really long shots, you need something with a little more reach." Jake watched her leave, his mind spinning with questions and implications. A female sniper with classified kill records, operating beyond normal command structures, preparing for a mission requiring extreme range engagements. Everything about Sergeant Rodriguez suggested she was far more than she appeared to be. He remained in the armory for several more minutes, staring at the empty workbench where she'd performed her maintenance with such casual expertise. On the white cloth, he noticed a small oil stain in the precise shape where the Barrett's bolt had rested. Even that seemed deliberately placed, perfectly centered, and clean around the edges. As Jake finally left the armory, one thought kept echoing in his mind. What exactly had he just encountered, and why did he have the feeling that everything he thought he knew about long-range marksmanship was about to be proven wrong? The morning sun was now fully above the mountains, casting the base in sharp relief against the barren landscape. Somewhere in that maze of buildings and equipment, Sergeant Rodriguez was preparing for a mission that promised to push the boundaries of what anyone thought possible with a rifle. Jake found himself looking forward to learning more about those boundaries and about the quiet woman who seemed so comfortable operating beyond them. Jake Mitchell couldn't shake the encounter with Sergeant Rodriguez from his thoughts as he continued his morning rounds. There was something about the way she'd handled that Barrett, the quiet confidence in her voice when discussing classified operations, and especially that cryptic comment about needing something with a little more reach that kept nagging at him. By the time he reached his office in the command center, Jake had made a decision. He needed to know more about who exactly was operating on his base, especially someone with the kind of security clearances Rodriguez carried. As a SEAL commander, he had access to personnel files and operational databases that most officers never saw. Settling behind his desk, Jake opened his encrypted computer terminal and navigated to the personnel database. He entered Rodriguez's name and service number, then waited while the system processed his security credentials. The file that appeared on his screen was frustratingly sparse. Basic biographical information showed that Staff Sergeant Maria Elena Rodriguez, age 29, had been born in Laredo, Texas, and enlisted in the Army 8 years ago. Her listed specialties included human intelligence collection, advanced marksmanship, and something called Special Activities Operations, which Jake had never seen on a personnel file before. Most of her assignment history was redacted, showing only dates and vague unit designations. What Jake could see painted the picture of someone who'd moved frequently between different commands, never staying in one place for more than 6 to 8 months. The assignments weren't random either. They followed patterns that suggested someone being deliberately positioned for specific missions. Jake's security clearance was high enough to access most military records, but Rodriguez's file contained several sections that were completely blocked from his view. That meant she was involved in operations above his clearance level, which was saying something for a SEAL team commander.
The most interesting part of the file was a series of commendations and decorations that told a story of exceptional performance in classified operations. Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device for Valor, Purple Heart, and several other medals that Jake recognized as being awarded for combat actions. But perhaps most intriguing was a citation for something called the Intelligence Community Medal of Merit, which was typically reserved for civilians working for agencies like the CIA or NSA. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying the screen. Rodriguez wasn't just a soldier who happened to be good with rifles. She was clearly special operations trained, with connections to the intelligence community that went far beyond normal military channels. A knock on his office door interrupted his research. "Come in," Jake called, not looking away from the computer. "Sir, you wanted to see the mission briefing for Operation Mountain Echo." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, Jake's executive officer, and one of the most competent officers he'd ever worked with. Jake looked up, confused for a moment. "I'm sorry, what operation?" Chen raised an eyebrow as she entered the office, carrying a thick folder marked with multiple classification stamps. "Mountain Echo, sir. The special access mission launching in 72 hours. I thought you'd requested the briefing materials." Jake felt a puzzle piece click into place. "The mission with extreme long-range requirements?" "That's the one, sir. Highly compartmentalized operation, run out of JSOC with support from other agencies." Chen set the folder on his desk. "Frankly, sir, it's one of the stranger mission profiles I've seen." Jake opened the folder and immediately understood why Chen found it strange. Operation Mountain Echo was designed around eliminating a single high-value target in the mountains along the Afghan-Pakistani border. The target was a Taliban commander who'd been responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces, but who operated from a stronghold that was essentially unreachable by conventional means. The geographic intelligence was sobering. The target's compound sat on a mountain peak at an elevation of over 4,000 meters, accessible only by helicopter or a days-long climb through hostile territory. It was surrounded by layers of security and early warning systems that made any direct assault extremely costly and dangerous, but what made the mission truly unusual was the proposed solution. Instead of a traditional raid or airstrike, the plan called for a single sniper to position themselves on a neighboring peak and eliminate the target from extreme range. Jake read through the technical specifications with growing amazement. The shooting position would be at an elevation of 4,200 meters, with the target at 4,050 meters across a valley that stretched over 3 kilometers wide. Weather conditions would be challenging, with variable winds and the thin air that came with high-altitude operations. Most remarkably, the mission planners had calculated that the actual line-of-sight distance from the sniper's position to the target would be 3,347 meters. Jake stared at that number for a long moment, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. "Sarah," he said slowly, "what's the longest confirmed sniper kill on record?" "Canadian Special Forces, sir. Craig Harrison in Afghanistan, 2009. Range of 2,475 meters. Chen answered without hesitation. "Why do you ask?" Jake pointed to the range calculation in the mission brief. "Because this mission is calling for a shot that's almost a full kilometer longer than the world record." Chen whistled softly. "That's ambitious, sir." "Who's the shooter?" "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Army Intelligence." "Intelligence?" Chen looked confused. "Sir, with respect, intelligence analysts don't typically have the marksmanship training for something like this. We're talking about a shot that most special operations snipers would consider impossible." Jake was beginning to understand why Rodriguez had been so careful about discussing her background. A shot of 3,347 meters wasn't just ambitious, it was beyond the theoretical limits of what most experts considered possible with current technology. "Pull everything you can find on Rodriguez," Jake told Chen. "Service record, training history, previous assignments. Use whatever clearance you need." "Yes, sir." "Should I also coordinate with the mission planners? If we're supporting this operation, I'll need to understand the logistics." "Absolutely. And Sarah, when you're researching Rodriguez's background, pay special attention to any marksmanship records or training with specialized weapons." After Chen left, Jake continued reading through the Mountain Echo mission brief. The more he learned, the more impressed he became with the complexity of the operation. This wasn't just about making an impossible shot. It was about solving a tactical problem that had stumped conventional military planners. The Taliban commander they were targeting had been operating from his mountain stronghold for over 2 years, coordinating attacks that had killed dozens of coalition personnel. Multiple attempts to eliminate him through airstrikes had failed due to the complex cave systems in his compound. Conventional raids were ruled out because of the extreme difficulty of the approach and the heavy fortifications surrounding the target. The sniper solution was elegant in its simplicity. A single shooter could potentially solve the problem with minimal risk to coalition forces, but only if they could make a shot that challenged every assumption about the limits of rifle marksmanship. Jake's research was interrupted by another knock on his door. This time, it was Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, the senior enlisted advisor for SEAL Team 7 and one of the most experienced operators Jake had ever met. "Commander," Williams said as he entered, "I just heard something interesting from the boys down in the equipment bay." "What's that, Master Chief?" "Well, sir, apparently someone requisitioned some very specialized gear from the armory this morning, including a custom rifle system that I've never seen before." Jake felt his interest sharpen. "What kind of custom system?" Williams consulted a small notebook he carried. "According to the requisition, it's designated as an XM-2010 enhanced battle rifle, but the specifications are unlike anything in our standard inventory. We're talking about a rifle chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum with a custom barrel, specialized optics, and some kind of advanced ballistic computer system." "338 Lapua," Jake repeated, recognizing the cartridge designation. It was a specialized round designed specifically for extreme long-range shooting, significantly more powerful than the .50 BMG round used in the Barrett. "That's right, sir. The interesting part is that this rifle system isn't even supposed to exist according to our inventory databases. But someone with very high-level authorization managed to have it delivered here overnight." Jake stood up from his desk, pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. "Who signed for the equipment?" "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, sir. Army Intelligence." Of course it was. Jake was beginning to understand that Rodriguez wasn't just any intelligence analyst. She was someone with connections and resources that went far beyond normal military channels. "Master Chief, I want you to personally verify all the equipment that Rodriguez has requested, and if she needs anything else, anything at all, make sure she gets it." "Aye, aye, sir." "Mind if I ask what this is about?" Jake thought about how much he could or should reveal. "Let's just say that Sergeant Rodriguez is about to attempt something that could rewrite the books on what's possible with a rifle." Williams nodded, understanding from Jake's tone that he shouldn't press for more details. "I'll make sure she has whatever she needs, sir." After Williams left, Jake returned to the mission briefing, trying to understand the full scope of what Rodriguez was attempting. The technical challenges alone were staggering. At over 3 kilometers, factors like wind speed and direction, air density, temperature variations, and even the rotation of the Earth would all affect the bullet's trajectory. But perhaps more challenging was the psychological aspect. Making a shot at that range would require absolute confidence and precision under enormous pressure. A single mistake could mean the failure of the entire mission and potentially the loss of valuable intelligence about enemy operations. Jake's computer chimed with an incoming message from Chen. She'd managed to gather additional information about Rodriguez's background, and what she'd found was remarkable. According to classified training records, Rodriguez had completed advanced marksmanship courses at Fort Benning, Quantico, and several civilian shooting schools. But more significantly, she'd also completed training with agencies that weren't officially acknowledged by the Pentagon. One record showed her attending something called the Advanced Long-Range Marksmanship Course at a facility in Virginia that Jake had never heard of. Another showed specialized training in high-altitude mountain operations with instructors from various government agencies. Most intriguingly, there were several records of Rodriguez participating in what were euphemistically called field training exercises in various countries around the world. The locations and dates were heavily redacted, but Jake could see enough to understand that these weren't standard military training events. The picture that emerged was of someone who'd been carefully developed and trained for exactly this type of mission. Rodriguez wasn't just a soldier who happened to be good with rifles. She was a specialized operator trained specifically for the kind of extreme long-range work that Operation Mountain Echo required. Jake's intercom buzzed, interrupting his analysis. "Sir," came his aide's voice, "Sergeant Rodriguez is here to see you. Says you wanted to discuss mission parameters." Jake felt a moment of surprise. He hadn't requested a meeting with Rodriguez, but he was certainly interested in talking to her. "Send her in." Rodriguez entered his office wearing clean desert fatigues and carrying a small tactical bag. She moved with the same quiet confidence Jake had noticed in the armory, but now he was beginning to understand where that confidence came from. "Sir," she said, taking a position at attention in front of his desk.
Please, have a seat, Sergeant. I've been reading about Operation Mountain Echo.
Rodriguez settled into the chair across from his desk, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, sir." "I figured you might have questions."
Just a few, Jake said dryly. Starting with how you plan to make a
347-meter shot with a rifle. For the first time since he'd met her, Rodriguez smiled. It was a small expression, but it completely transformed her face, making her look younger and more approachable.
Very carefully, sir. Jake laughed despite himself. I'm serious, Sergeant. The longest confirmed sniper kill on record is almost a kilometer shorter than what you're attempting. What makes you think this is even possible? Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, and Jake could see her weighing how much to reveal. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful and precise. "Sir, the record you're referring to was set with standard military equipment under combat conditions. The shooter had limited time to set up, standard ammunition, and basic environmental monitoring equipment." She paused, reaching into her tactical bag and pulling out a small device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a scientific instrument. "This mission has been in planning for 8 months. We've had time to develop specialized ammunition, custom rifle systems, and advanced ballistic computation equipment. We've also had time to study the target location extensively, including detailed topographic mapping and long-term weather pattern analysis." Jake examined the device she'd shown him. It was covered in sensors and readouts he didn't recognize, but it was clearly far more sophisticated than any equipment he'd seen in standard military use. "What kind of specialized ammunition are we talking about?" "Custom manufactured rounds with precisely controlled powder charges and aerodynamically optimized projectiles. Each round is individually tested for consistency and matched to the specific barrel characteristics of the rifle system." Rodriguez spoke with the kind of technical precision that suggested deep familiarity with the science of extreme long-range shooting. This wasn't just theoretical knowledge. She'd clearly applied these concepts in real-world conditions. "And you've made shots at these ranges before?" Again, that careful pause.
"Yes, sir."
"Under controlled conditions and with appropriate support equipment." Jake sensed there was much more to that statement than she was revealing. "What's the longest shot you've ever made?" Rodriguez looked directly at him, her dark eyes serious and steady. "That's classified, sir. But I will say this. The Mountain Echo shot, while challenging, is well within my demonstrated capabilities." The quiet confidence in her voice was compelling. This wasn't bravado or false confidence. Rodriguez spoke like someone who'd already done the calculations and knew exactly what she was capable of. "What do you need from me and my team to make this work?"
"Primarily logistical support, sir."
"Transportation to and from the shooting position, communication equipment, and backup extraction plans. The actual shooting will be a solo operation." Jake frowned. "No spotter? No support team?" "No, sir. For this type of work, additional personnel can be more of a liability than an asset. The shooting position is extremely exposed, and the approach route can only accommodate one person safely." It went against every principle of sniper operations that Jake knew, but he was beginning to understand that normal rules didn't apply to what Rodriguez was doing. "When do you deploy?" "Tomorrow at 0300, sir. I'll be in position by sunset with the shot window opening at first light the following morning. Less than 24 hours. Jake felt a chill at the thought of what Rodriguez was about to attempt. If she succeeded, she would not only complete the mission, but also set a marksmanship record that might never be broken. If she failed, the consequences could be far-reaching for future operations. "Is there anything else you need, Sergeant?" Rodriguez stood up, shouldering her bag. "Just clear weather, sir. Everything else is ready." As she headed for the door, Jake called after her, "Sergeant, for what it's worth, good luck." She paused at the threshold, looking back at him with that same small smile he'd seen earlier. "Thank you, sir, but luck doesn't have much to do with it." After she left, Jake sat alone in his office, contemplating what he'd just learned. Tomorrow, on a mountain peak in Afghanistan, a quiet woman from Texas would attempt something that challenged the very limits of what human beings could accomplish with a rifle. The number 3,347 seemed to echo in his mind, representing not just a distance but a boundary between the possible and the impossible. In less than 36 hours, Jake would discover which side of that boundary Rodriguez actually lived on. The pre-dawn darkness at Forward Operating Base Sentinel was broken only by the occasional sweep of searchlights along the perimeter walls and the distant glow of instrument panels in the command center. At 02:45 hours, Rodriguez made her final preparations in a small equipment room that had been temporarily converted into her mission staging area. Jake Mitchell stood in the doorway, watching as she methodically packed her gear with the same precision he'd witnessed during the rifle cleaning 2 days earlier. Every item had its place. Every component had been checked and double-checked. There was something almost ritualistic about the way she prepared, as if the careful organization of equipment was itself a form of mental preparation for what lay ahead. The custom rifle system lay on the table before her, partially disassembled for transport. Jake had seen many specialized weapons during his military career, but nothing quite like this one. The barrel alone was a work of art, nearly 30 inches of precisely machined steel, with a finish that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The scope mounted above it was unlike anything in standard military inventory, featuring multiple adjustment dials and what appeared to be an integrated computer display. "That's quite a piece of equipment," Jake observed, nodding toward the rifle. Rodriguez looked up from packing her ammunition. Each round was individually cushioned in custom foam, and Jake could see that even the cartridges were unlike anything he'd seen before. They were slightly longer than standard rounds, with bullets that had an unusual aerodynamic profile. "Custom built by a company in Montana," Rodriguez explained, carefully securing the ammunition box. "The barrel is hand-lapped for consistency, and the action has been blueprinted to tolerances of less than 1/1000th of an inch. Everything about it is designed for extreme precision at extreme range." She lifted one of the cartridges for Jake to examine. "These rounds use a very specific powder charge calculated for optimal velocity at high altitude. The bullets are manufactured with a specialized copper alloy that maintains ballistic consistency better than standard projectiles." Jake handled the cartridge carefully, noting its weight and the unusual design of the bullet. "How much do rounds like this cost?" "About $80 each." Jake's eyebrows rose. "Standard military ammunition costs less than $2 per round." "For one bullet?" "For one perfect bullet," Rodriguez corrected. "At the range I'm shooting, even tiny variations in bullet weight or powder charge can mean the difference between a hit and a miss measured in meters, not inches." She continued packing, each item finding its designated place in her tactical pack. Jake watched her stow specialized weather monitoring equipment, a laser rangefinder that looked more like a piece of scientific equipment than military gear, and several devices he didn't recognize at all. "Walk me through what happens once you reach the shooting position," Jake requested. He'd read the mission briefing, but he wanted to understand the process from Rodriguez's perspective. Rodriguez paused in her packing, clearly organizing her thoughts. "First, I establish the shooting position and verify the range to target using multiple measurement methods. The mission planners have calculated 3,347 meters, but I need to confirm that down to the exact meter." She pulled out a tablet computer and showed Jake a topographic display of the target area. The shooting position and target location were marked with GPS coordinates, connected by a line that represented the bullet's path. "Next, I gather environmental data, wind speed and direction at multiple points along the bullet's flight path, air temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and air density calculations for the altitude."
Rodriguez pointed to various points on the display.
At this range, even small changes in atmospheric conditions can affect bullet trajectory by several feet. Jake studied the display, trying to comprehend the complexity of what she was describing. "How do you measure wind conditions along a 3-kilometer path?" "Combination of methods," Rodriguez replied, switching to a different view on the tablet. "Weather monitoring equipment gives me local conditions at the shooting position. Visual observation of vegetation, dust patterns, and mirage effects help estimate wind at different points along the trajectory. The ballistic computer uses all this data to calculate bullet drop and windage corrections." She showed Jake another screen displaying what looked like an extremely complex mathematical model. Numbers scrolled continuously as the computer processed various inputs, generating firing solutions that updated in real time. "This is what makes the shot possible," Rodriguez continued. 50 years ago, a shot at this range would have been pure guesswork. Today, we can calculate bullet trajectory with enough precision to put rounds on target at distances that were unimaginable just a generation ago. Jake was beginning to understand the technical sophistication behind Rodriguez's confidence. This wasn't just marksmanship, it was applied ballistic science at the highest level. "What's your backup plan if the conditions aren't right for the shot?" Rodriguez's expression became more serious. "The mission window is 48 hours. If conditions aren't suitable during the primary window tomorrow morning, I wait for the next opportunity. But weather forecasts indicate optimal conditions during the primary window. And if you miss?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Rodriguez continued packing while she considered her answer. Sir, at this range, there are no second chances. If the first shot doesn't achieve the objective, the target will immediately take cover and the opportunity will be lost.
That's why everything has to be perfect the first time. The weight of responsibility in her voice was unmistakable.
This wasn't just about setting a marksmanship record. The success or failure of the entire operation depended on her ability to make one perfect shot under conditions that most experts would consider impossible. Master Chief Williams appeared in the doorway, carrying a radio headset and several other pieces of communication equipment.
Ma'am, your comms gear is ready for final testing.
Rodriguez accepted the equipment and quickly ran through a communications check with the base operations center. Jake listened as she verified multiple backup communication methods and confirmed emergency extraction procedures.
Your ride's about ready too, Williams added. Pilot says conditions are good for the approach, but the landing zone is going to be tight. Jake had read about the insertion plan, and it was almost as challenging as the shot itself.
Rodriguez would be transported by Special Operations helicopter to a landing zone on a neighboring mountain peak, then make a solo climb to the shooting position, along a route that was barely more than a goat trail.
How long is the approach to the shooting position? Jake asked. About 4 hours of climbing, Rodriguez replied, adjusting the straps on her pack. The last kilometer is technical rock work, but nothing I haven't done before. Jake found himself impressed once again by the breadth of Rodriguez's capabilities. She wasn't just a marksman. She was apparently an experienced mountaineer as well. Where did you learn technical climbing? Army Mountain Warfare School initially, then additional training with other agencies. You can't make shots like this from sea level, sir. Most of my work involves operating in challenging terrain. As Rodriguez completed her preparations, Jake began to understand why the mission planners had selected her for this operation. This wasn't just about finding someone who could shoot accurately at extreme range. They needed someone who could operate independently in hostile terrain, make complex technical calculations under pressure, and possess the mental discipline to wait for the perfect moment to take a shot that would either make history or end in failure. Lieutenant Commander Chen appeared with the final mission briefing updates. Sergeant, latest intelligence confirms the target will be in position during the primary window. Weather forecast remains favorable, with winds of 5 to 8 miles per hour from the southeast. Rodriguez nodded, making notes on her tablet. Roger that, ma'am. Any changes to the extraction plan? Negative. Extraction bird will be on station starting at 1200 hours, prepared to remain until mission completion or abort. Jake watched as Rodriguez made final adjustments to her equipment loadout, fine-tuning the balance and accessibility of every item. Her movements were economical and purposeful, those of someone who understood that in the field, even small details could mean the difference between success and failure. Sergeant, Jake said, I have to ask one more time. Are you confident this shot is possible? Rodriguez looked at him directly, her dark eyes steady and serious. Sir, I've been preparing for this specific mission for 8 months. Every variable has been calculated, every contingency planned for. The rifle system has been tested and verified at extended ranges. My personal equipment and preparation are as perfect as I can make them. She paused, shouldering her pack and checking its balance. But you're asking if I'm confident about attempting something that no one has ever done before under combat conditions. The honest answer is that confidence doesn't really apply here. This is about preparation, calculation, and execution. The shot is either possible or it isn't, and we'll find out tomorrow morning. There was something both humbling and inspiring about her response. Rodriguez wasn't approaching this mission with bravado or false confidence. She was treating it as a complex technical problem that required precise execution under extreme pressure. The radio crackled with the pilot's voice. Departure in 10 minutes. Weather window looks good, but we need to move to stay on schedule.
Rodriguez made a final check of her gear, then turned to face Jake.
Sir, thank you for your support.
If everything goes according to plan, I'll see you tomorrow afternoon.
Sergeant, Jake said, then paused, searching for the right words. I don't know what your background is or where you learned to do what you do, but I want you to know that watching you prepare for this mission has been educational. Good luck out there. Rodriguez smiled, that same small expression that transformed her face. Thank you, sir. But remember what I told you about luck. As she headed for the door, Jake called after her one more time. Rodriguez. That number you mentioned. 3,347 meters. Is that really going to be the longest shot you've ever made? She paused in the doorway, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It's going to be the longest shot anyone has ever made, sir. At least officially. The implications of that statement hit Jake like a physical blow.
Rodriguez wasn't just attempting to break the world record for longest sniper kill. She was suggesting that she'd already made shots at ranges that exceeded anything officially documented. How much longer? Jake asked quietly.
Rodriguez was silent for a moment, clearly debating how much to reveal. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet, Jake had to strain to hear it over the background noise of the bass. Let's just say that tomorrow's shot will be a significant achievement, sir, but it won't be my personal best. With that, she disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving Jake standing alone in the equipment room with the weight of an extraordinary revelation. As the sound of the helicopter rotors grew louder in the distance, Jake found himself contemplating what he'd just learned. Rodriguez wasn't just attempting the impossible. She was apparently someone who regularly operated beyond the boundaries of what most people considered achievable. The number, 3,347 meters, suddenly seemed less important than the question of just how far beyond those boundaries Rodriguez had already traveled. Tomorrow morning, the world would witness something unprecedented in military marksmanship. But Jake was beginning to suspect that for Rodriguez, it was just another day at the office. The helicopter lifted off exactly on schedule, carrying Rodriguez and her impossible mission into the mountains where history would either be made or the limits of human capability would be confirmed once and for all. Jake stood on the flight line, watching the aircraft's lights disappear into the darkness, and wondered if he would ever fully understand what he had just witnessed. In a few hours, the answer to decades of questions about the ultimate limits of rifle marksmanship would be decided by a quiet woman from Texas who spoke about impossible shots with the same casual precision she used to clean a rifle. The helicopter insertion went exactly according to plan, depositing Rodriguez on a narrow ledge at 3,800 meters elevation, just as the eastern horizon began to show the first pale hints of dawn. The pilot had managed the approach with surgical precision, hovering just long enough for Rodriguez to rappel onto the rocky outcrop before disappearing back into the valley below. Rodriguez found herself alone on the mountain in the thin, cold air that came with extreme altitude. The landing zone was exactly as the reconnaissance photos had shown, a small platform of relatively flat rock surrounded by nearly vertical drops on three sides. From here, she would have to make her way up another 400 meters of technical climbing to reach the shooting position. She took a moment to orient herself, checking her GPS coordinates against the mission planning data. Everything matched perfectly. The target location was visible across the valley, a distant compound perched on another mountain peak that seemed impossibly far away, even through her binoculars. Rodriguez began her climb methodically, following a route that had been carefully planned and rehearsed on satellite imagery. The path was treacherous, requiring her to traverse narrow ledges and negotiate several short vertical sections where she had to use climbing gear to maintain safety margins with her heavy pack. The weight of her equipment made every movement deliberate and calculated. In addition to the rifle system and ammunition, she carried specialized weather monitoring equipment, communication gear, emergency supplies, and climbing hardware. The total load was over 60 pounds, distributed across her body in a way that maintained her center of gravity while still allowing for the precise movements required by technical climbing. As she climbed higher, Rodriguez could feel the effects of the thin air. At this altitude, oxygen levels were roughly 60% of what they would be at sea level. Every breath required conscious effort, and she had to pace herself carefully to avoid exhaustion before reaching the shooting position. The route took her along a series of connected ledges that wound around the mountain face like an ancient stairway. Some sections were wide enough to walk comfortably, while others required her to edge carefully along precipices with 1,000-foot drops just inches away. Rodriguez moved with the confident precision of someone who had trained extensively for this type of terrain. 2 hours into the climb, she reached a small sheltered area where she could rest and check her equipment. The shooting position was still 200 meters above her, but she was making good time. More importantly, the weather conditions remained optimal for the mission. Rodriguez pulled out her portable weather station and began gathering atmospheric data. Wind speed at her current location was steady at 6 miles per hour from the southeast, consistent with the forecasts. Air temperature was -2 degrees Celsius, and barometric pressure indicated stable high-pressure system over the region. She compared these readings to the ballistic calculations she'd prepared during mission planning. The conditions were almost exactly what she'd hoped for: stable air masses, minimal wind, and clear visibility across the target area. The final approach to the shooting position required the most technical climbing of the entire route. Rodriguez had to negotiate a near-vertical rock face using fixed anchors she'd placed during a reconnaissance mission 3 weeks earlier. The exposure was extreme, with nothing but empty air for thousands of feet below her boots. But Rodriguez moved up the rock face with steady confidence, her movements economical and precise.
She'd completed this exact climb multiple times during preparation, and even with the added weight of her mission equipment, the route felt familiar and manageable. As she pulled herself over the final ledge onto the shooting position, Rodriguez felt a moment of satisfaction at having completed the approach exactly on schedule. The shooting position was a small plateau roughly 10 meters long and 5 meters wide, offering clear lines of sight across the valley to the target area. The view was breathtaking in its scope and isolation. She stood at over 4,200 meters elevation, surrounded by peaks that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Far below, the valleys were still shrouded in morning mist, while above her, the sky was an intense blue that seemed almost black at this altitude. But Rodriguez had little time to appreciate the scenery. She had less than 2 hours to establish her shooting position, gather final environmental data, and prepare for the shot window that would open at 0800 hours when intelligence indicated the target would make his scheduled appearance. Rodriguez immediately began setting up her equipment with the systematic precision that had characterized all her mission preparations. First, she established her shooting platform using a specialized bipod system that could be precisely adjusted for both elevation and wind correction. The platform had to be absolutely stable. At 3,347 meters, even tiny movements would translate into massive errors at the target. Next, she assembled the rifle system, each component fitting together with the precision of a Swiss watch. The custom barrel locked into the action with a satisfying click, and the specialized scope mounted with exactly the same eye relief and position she'd used during hundreds of hours of practice. While the rifle system came together, Rodriguez deployed her environmental monitoring equipment. The weather station provided real-time data on wind speed, direction, temperature, and humidity at her position. But for a shot at this range, she also needed to estimate atmospheric conditions along the entire bullet flight path. Rodriguez spent nearly an hour studying the valley through her spotting scope, looking for visual indicators of wind patterns and air movement. She watched the way morning mist moved through the valleys, observed the movement of vegetation on distant ridges, and noted the behavior of thermal currents as the sun began to warm the mountain faces. Using this information, combined with her technical instruments and the ballistic computer, Rodriguez began calculating her firing solution. The computer processed dozens of variables, from the precise range to target to the effective air density at altitude on bullet trajectory. The mathematics involved were staggering in their complexity. At 3,347 meters, the bullet would take over 4 seconds to reach the target, during which time it would drop nearly 30 feet due to gravity alone. Wind effects were even more challenging to calculate, as crosswinds along the flight path would push the bullet laterally by several feet, if not properly compensated. Perhaps most challenging was accounting for the Coriolis effect. The rotation of the Earth itself would influence the bullet's trajectory over such a long flight time. At this range, the Earth's rotation would deflect the bullet by nearly 8 inches, a factor that was negligible for normal shooting distances, but critical for extreme long-range work. Rodriguez input all the environmental data into her ballistic computer and watched as it generated a firing solution. The recommended scope adjustments appeared on the display. Elevation correction of 87.2 minutes of angle up, windage correction of 3.1 minutes of angle right, with additional corrections for atmospheric density and Coriolis effect. She made the adjustments to her scope with precise clicks of the adjustment dials, each click representing a tiny change in point of impact that would translate to feet of difference at the target. The scope's internal mechanisms were precise to fractions of an inch, allowing for the kind of minute adjustments that extreme long-range shooting demanded. With her rifle configured for the shot, Rodriguez settled into her shooting position and began the mental preparation that was just as important as the technical setup. At this range, the margin for error was essentially zero. Every aspect of her shooting technique had to be perfect: breathing, trigger control, sight alignment, and follow-through. Rodriguez checked her watch. 0745 hours. The shot window would open in 15 minutes when intelligence assets confirmed the target's location. She used this time to practice her breathing pattern and settle into the kind of mental state that extreme precision shooting required. Through her scope, the target compound was clearly visible despite the incredible distance. She could make out individual buildings, vehicles, and even some personnel moving around the area. The target building was a 2-story structure at the center of the compound, with a balcony where the Taliban commander was scheduled to make his morning appearance. At 0705 hours, Rodriguez's radio crackled with a transmission from the intelligence team monitoring the compound. "Shooter, this is Overwatch. Target is moving toward the designated location.
Estimated time to exposure is 3 minutes. Rodriguez keyed her radio. Overwatch, this is Shooter. Copy target approaching. Conditions are optimal, standing by for confirmation. She settled behind her rifle, adjusting her position until the sight picture was perfect. The crosshairs were aligned precisely on the center of the target balcony, with all scope corrections dialed in according to her ballistic calculations. Rodriguez controlled her breathing, settling into the rhythm she'd practiced thousands of times during training. At this range, even her heartbeat could affect the rifle's stability, so she timed her shooting sequence to occur during the natural pause between heartbeats. Shooter, this is Overwatch. Target is on the balcony. You are cleared to engage. Through her scope, Rodriguez could see a figure emerge onto the balcony of the target building. Even at maximum magnification, the person appeared as little more than a moving shape, but intelligence had confirmed this was their objective. Rodriguez made final adjustments to her position, ensuring that every aspect of her shooting platform was optimized for precision. The rifle felt perfectly balanced in her hands, the scope picture was crystal clear, and the environmental conditions remained stable. She began her final breathing sequence, drawing air slowly and steadily while maintaining perfect sight alignment. On her third exhale, Rodriguez allowed her breathing to pause naturally at the bottom of the respiratory cycle, her body completely relaxed and stable. The crosshairs held steady on the distant target as Rodriguez applied gradual pressure to the trigger. The trigger itself was a precision instrument, adjusted to break at exactly 2 pounds of pressure with no overtravel or creep. At this moment, Rodriguez embodied the convergence of human skill and technological capability that made extreme long-range marksmanship possible. Years of training, months of mission-specific preparation, and the most advanced rifle system ever created had brought her to this precise instant in time. The trigger broke with surgical precision, sending the carefully crafted projectile on its 4-second journey across the valley. The rifle's recoil was perfectly managed by Rodriguez's shooting position, allowing her to maintain sight picture and observe the shot's impact. For 4 eternal seconds, the bullet flew through the thin mountain air, following a trajectory calculated to nanometer precision by computers and executed with the kind of human skill that transcended normal capability. Across the valley, 3,347 meters away, physics and human determination would collide with finality. Rodriguez remained perfectly still behind her rifle, watching through the scope as the future of extreme long-range marksmanship wrote itself in the clear mountain air above Afghanistan. The number 3,347 was about to become either a new benchmark for human achievement or a reminder that some boundaries exist for good reason. In the command center back at the base, Jake Mitchell monitored radio traffic from the mission, knowing that in a few seconds he would understand exactly what kind of operator Rodriguez truly was. The radio transmission came through crystal clear in the command center at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. Overwatch, this is Shooter. Target down. Mission complete. Jake Mitchell felt the breath he'd been holding escape in a long exhale. Around the command center, personnel who had been monitoring the mission looked up from their stations with expressions of amazement and relief. Rodriguez had done it. She had made a shot that redefined what was possible with a rifle, but the full implications of what had just occurred were still sinking in. As Jake processed the mission reports that began flowing in from various intelligence assets, he realized that Rodriguez hadn't just completed her mission. She had shattered every assumption about the limits of human marksmanship. The intelligence team's report confirmed that the Taliban commander had been eliminated with a single shot to center mass. Video surveillance from multiple angles showed the target on his balcony one moment, then down the next, with no indication of what had struck him until the distant sound of the rifle shot reached the compound nearly 4 seconds later. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Chen called from her workstation. "I'm getting reports from the observation posts. They're saying the shot was... well, it was perfect." Jake walked over to Chen's station where she was coordinating with various intelligence assets that had been monitoring the target compound. The reports coming in painted a picture of marksmanship that bordered on the impossible. "How perfect?" Jake asked. Chen consulted her notes, shaking her head in apparent disbelief. According to the technical analysis team, the bullet impact was within 2 inches of the calculated aim point at 3,347 meters. "That's not just a successful shot, sir. That's mechanical precision at a range where most experts would consider any hit to be largely dependent on luck." Jake felt a chill as he contemplated what that level of precision meant. Rodriguez hadn't just made an extremely long shot. She had demonstrated an ability to place bullets with surgical accuracy at distances that challenged fundamental assumptions about rifle capabilities. The radio crackled again with Rodriguez's voice. "Base, this is Shooter. Beginning extraction sequence. Request pickup at designated LZ in 2 hours. Jake keyed the microphone himself. Shooter, this is base actual. Outstanding work out there, Sergeant. Transport is already en route to your location. Roger, base actual. See you this afternoon. As the immediate excitement of mission completion began to settle, Jake found himself reflecting on the broader implications of what Rodriguez had accomplished. The current world record for longest confirmed sniper kill had stood at 2,475 meters, set by a Canadian Special Forces sniper under near-perfect conditions. Rodriguez had exceeded that record by over 870 meters, an increase of more than 35%. But perhaps more significantly, she had done it under operational conditions, with a single shot, against a target that represented a legitimate military objective. This wasn't a target shooting exhibition or a demonstration under controlled conditions. This was a combat mission that had achieved its objectives while simultaneously rewriting the record books. Master Chief Williams appeared at Jake's shoulder, carrying a folder thick with technical data. Sir, I've been going through the ballistic analysis from the mission. You're going to want to see this. Jake accepted the folder and began reading through technical specifications that made his head spin. The bullet had traveled 3,347 meters in 4.2 seconds, following a trajectory that curved nearly 38 feet below the line of sight due to gravity. Wind deflection had been calculated and compensated for with precision measured in inches. These calculations, Jake said, looking up at Williams, are they saying what I think they're saying? Yes, sir. Sergeant Rodriguez didn't just make a lucky shot at extreme range. She calculated and executed a precision engagement that required mathematical and technical skills that most people don't possess, combined with marksmanship capabilities that, well, sir, that exceed anything I've seen in 28 years of military service. Jake continued reading through the technical analysis, trying to comprehend the complexity of what Rodriguez had accomplished. The ballistic computer data showed corrections for atmospheric pressure, air density, wind speed, and direction at multiple points along the trajectory, temperature variations, and even the rotation of the Earth itself. How many people do you think could make this shot? Jake asked Williams. The Master Chief was quiet for a moment, clearly considering the question seriously. Sir, honestly, I'm not sure anyone else could make this shot. The technical knowledge alone requires expertise in ballistics, meteorology, and precision shooting that you just don't find in one person very often. Add in the physical skills, the mental discipline, and the operational capabilities Rodriguez displayed, I think we're looking at a very unique individual. As if to emphasize Williams' point, Jake's computer chimed with an incoming message from higher headquarters. The message was brief but significant. Request immediate after-action report on Operation Mountain Echo. Initial reports indicate possible new marksmanship record. Pentagon and Joint Staff require detailed technical analysis for verification and documentation. Jake realized that word of Rodriguez's achievement was already moving up the chain of command. Within hours, her shot would be under analysis by ballistic experts, military historians, and marksmanship specialists from around the world. 2 hours later, Jake stood on the base's landing pad as the extraction helicopter settled onto the marked concrete pad. Rodriguez emerged from the aircraft, looking no different than she had when she departed, calm, professional, and completely unaffected by the magnitude of what she had just accomplished. She carried her rifle case and equipment bag with the same careful precision Jake had observed throughout their brief acquaintance. But now he understood that precision in a completely different context. What he had initially seen as careful attention to detail was actually the manifestation of capabilities that operated on an entirely different level than normal military competence. Sergeant, Jake said as Rodriguez approached, congratulations on a successful mission.
Thank you, sir.
The target has been neutralized and intelligence objectives have been met. Jake noticed that Rodriguez spoke about her achievement in the same measured, professional tone she had used when discussing routine equipment maintenance. There was no bravado, no excitement, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who had completed a difficult job successfully. I'm sure you're aware that what you accomplished out there is going to generate significant attention, Jake said as they walked toward the command center. The Pentagon is already requesting detailed reports on your shot. Rodriguez nodded. Yes, sir. I expected that would happen. Breaking the world record tends to attract notice. Breaking it by nearly a kilometer attracts more than notice, Jake observed. This is going to change how people think about what's possible with rifle marksmanship. For the first time since her return, Rodriguez showed a hint of the small smile Jake had seen before. Sir, with respect, this shot isn't really about changing what's possible. It's about demonstrating what was always possible with the right combination of technology, training, and conditions. They entered the command center, where Rodriguez was immediately surrounded by personnel, eager to congratulate her and learn details about her achievement. Jake watched as she answered questions with the same technical precision she applied to everything else, explaining ballistic calculations and environmental factors with the patience of a teacher. But Jake found himself focused on something Rodriguez had said. What was always possible? The implication was that shots at this range had been theoretically achievable for some time, waiting only for someone with the capability to execute them. Later that evening, Jake found himself alone with Rodriguez in his office, reviewing the official mission reports that would be submitted to higher headquarters. The documentation was extensive, including detailed ballistic analysis, environmental data, and technical specifications for the equipment used. "Sergeant," Jake said, looking up from the reports, "I have to ask you something, and I'd appreciate a straight answer." Rodriguez looked at him with those same intelligent dark eyes that had intrigued him since their first meeting. "Yes, sir?" "Earlier, you mentioned that this shot wouldn't be your personal best. I've been thinking about that statement, and I have to wonder, just how far beyond 3,447 meters have you actually reached?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her response carefully. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful and measured. "Sir, there are some operations that occur outside normal documentation channels. The kind of work where official records aren't kept and achievements aren't publicized. Sometimes that's for operational security reasons. Sometimes it's because the missions themselves are classified at levels that don't permit normal reporting."
Jake felt his pulse quicken. "Are you saying you've made shots longer than 3,347 meters?"
I'm saying that today's mission was significant not because it represents the limits of what's possible, but because it's the longest shot that can be officially documented and publicly acknowledged.
The implications of that statement hit Jake like a physical blow. Rodriguez was telling him that somewhere, under circumstances he would probably never learn about, she had made shots that exceeded even today's extraordinary achievement. "How much longer?" Jake asked quietly. Rodriguez looked at him for a long moment, then reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. She opened it to a page near the back and showed it to Jake briefly before closing it again. Jake had only seen the page for a few seconds, but what he glimpsed made his breath catch. The notebook contained what appeared to be a shooting log, with dates, locations, ranges, and environmental conditions. The entries were handwritten in Rodriguez's precise script, and the ranges listed exceeded anything Jake had imagined possible. "That's..." Jake started, then stopped, unable to find words for what he'd seen. "Classified, sir. At levels that mean those records will never see the light of day." Rodriguez returned the notebook to her pocket. But today's mission was important because it establishes a new baseline for what can be officially acknowledged. It opens the door for discussions about advanced marksmanship capabilities that have existed for some time but couldn't be discussed publicly. Jake sat back in his chair, trying to process what Rodriguez had revealed. The 347-meter shot that had amazed everyone at the base was apparently not even close to the actual limits of her capabilities. She was operating on a level that transcended normal military marksmanship by margins he couldn't even calculate. "Who are you really, Sergeant Rodriguez?" Rodriguez smiled, that small, transformative expression Jake had come to recognize. "I'm a soldier, sir. Just one who's had access to very specialized training and equipment that most people never see. And the agencies you've worked with? Some questions are better left unanswered, sir. But I will say this. There are capabilities within the US government that extend far beyond what most people realize." Today's mission was a small demonstration of what's possible when those capabilities are applied to specific problems. Jake nodded, understanding that he had learned as much as Rodriguez was willing or able to reveal. But what he had learned was staggering in its implications for military capabilities and the boundaries of human achievement. As Rodriguez prepared to leave his office, Jake had one final question. "What's next for you, Sergeant? After this kind of achievement, where do you go from here?" Rodriguez paused at the door, looking back at him with an expression that contained both satisfaction and anticipation. "There's always another mountain, sir. Always another impossible shot that needs to be made. The technology keeps improving, the training keeps getting more sophisticated, and the missions keep getting more challenging." She opened the door, then paused once more. "But if you ever hear stories about shots made at ranges that seem impossible to believe, sir, remember that impossible is often just another word for undocumented." With that, Rodriguez disappeared into the evening, leaving Jake alone with the weight of extraordinary revelations.
The number 3,347 would indeed go into the record books as the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history. But Jake now understood that it represented not the pinnacle of human marksmanship, but simply the highest peak that could be officially acknowledged. Somewhere in Rodriguez's classified notebook were records of achievements that pushed human capability beyond anything the world had ever imagined possible. And somewhere in the shadowy world of government operations that officially didn't exist, the quiet woman from Texas continued to redefine the boundaries between the possible and the impossible, one impossible shot at a time. The SEAL commander who had discovered her cleaning a Barrett .50 caliber rifle now understood that he had encountered not just an exceptional soldier, but a living legend whose greatest achievements would forever remain hidden in the classified shadows where the most extraordinary stories never see the light of day. The number, 3,347 meters, would make history. But the numbers in Rodriguez's notebook would remain forever locked away, known only to a select few who understood that some legends are too dangerous to ever become public knowledge.